Hi everybody. More information about how to make your writing a little bit better as you're working on your essays. So another type of sentence mistake that Alyssa and I will be marking on your essays are CS and RO errors. So CS is for comma splice and RO is for run-ons. So that's what we're going to talk about right now. So what is a comma splice and what is a run-on? So take a look at these sentences. The icebergs broke off from the glacier. They drifted into the sea. This is an example of a comma splice. So that's when we have two or more independent clauses and they're incorrectly joined with a comma. So, we have the icebergs broke off from the glacier. That's an independent clause. And we have they drifted into the sea. That's also an independent clause. But we can't just join an independent clause with a comma. It just doesn't work that way. All right, so the icebergs broke off from the glacier, they drifted into the sea. This is an example of a run-on because we have two or more independent clauses and they're written one after another without a coordinating conjunction. So in this case, the icebergs broke off from the glacier, that's an independent clause. They drifted into the sea, that's still an independent clause, but there's nothing to show us what the relationship is between those independent clauses. So how do you fix them? Well, these errors are corrected kind of the same way. The icebergs broke off from the glacier, period. They drifted into the sea. So you can just add a period after the first independent clause. Another option is to add a semicolon. Then the third option, you could add a coordinating conjunction. So those are the words, you learn these in level 2, and the fanboys, right? So that's when you add a comma and then add a coordinating conjunction. And then another option is to add a subordinating conjunction. Okay, so we just learned about those. So then you can add a dependent clause. The icebergs broke off from the glacier before they drifted into the sea. So when you are looking at your own essays, how do you detect if you have a CS and a run-on? So I'm just going to show you a few different ways. There are more, but I'm going to show you a few common ways to see if you have these. So first, when you're looking at your sentences, see if you notice any pronouns that are starting the second independent clause. That might be a hint that you have a comma splice or run-on. The physicist Marie Curie discovered radium. She won 2 Nobel Prizes. So notice that we have radium and she, and what's the problem here? Yeah, it's a run-on. So we can correct it using a period. That's one way to do it. The physicist Marie Curie discovered radium. She won 2 Nobel Prizes. Okay, another way to detect comma splice or run-on. Watch out for transitional expressions. So these are words like in addition, for example, in contrast, of course, meanwhile. And I have to say these are pretty common in your writing, so these are the things to look for. So here's an example of an incorrect sentence. Marie Curie and her husband won a Nobel Prize for the discovery of radium. In addition, Marie won another Nobel Prize for her work on the atomic weight of radium. So how do you think you could correct this using how could you correct it? Well, first you have to find the mistake, and the mistake is here. Okay, so the comma before in addition, something's wrong there. So you could correct it using a semicolon or a period. So first let's look at the semicolon. We just add a semicolon after radium, okay? Another option is just to put a period after radium and then start a new sentence. Okay, another way to detect comma splice and run-ons is to watch out for a second independent clause that explains or says more about or contrasts with or gives an example of what's said in the first independent clause. This is pretty common, okay? So here's an example. Marie Curie died of leukemia in 1934. Exposure to radioactivity killed her. So we've got 2 independent clauses here. Marie Curie died of leukemia in 1934. That's a complete sentence. Exposure to radioactivity killed her. That is also a complete sentence. We have a subject phrase and we have verb, predicate, but it's joined here with a comma, so it's comma splice mistake. So how could you correct it using a period? Pretty simple, right? Marie Curie died of leukemia in 1934. Exposure to radioactivity killed her. All right, so we already talked about different ways to correct comma splice and run-on. So let's just practice them a little bit more. So method one is to use a period between the independent clauses. A shark is all cartilage. It doesn't have a bone in its body. So what's the problem here? Exactly, this is a run-on. Cartilage is kind of like your nose or your earlobes, if you're wondering what that word means. So if you want to correct it using a period, there you go. A shark is all cartilage. It doesn't have a bone in its body. All right, method two is to use a semicolon between the independent clauses. So what are the two independent clauses here? The great white shark supposedly eats humans. And then the other one is research shows that most white sharks spit them out after the first bite. So the problem, this is a comma splice, right? There's a comma there. So if we want to fix it using a semicolon, we just put a semicolon instead of a comma. Okay, now be careful. Don't overuse semicolons, and you have to use them only when those separate sentences are very closely related in meaning. So maybe one or two in your essay, but that's enough. All right, then method three is use a comma together with a coordinating conjunction. The great white shark supposedly eats humans. Research shows that most white sharks spit them out after the first bite. Okay, so use one of your fanboys, right? Now think about which one makes the most sense. Yeah, but. We would want to use but to show that there's a contrast, a contrasting idea here. Okay. Then the last method I'm going to show you is to revise one independent clause and turn it into an adjective-dependent clause with relative pronouns. Now we haven't talked a lot about this yet in grammar class. We will in a few weeks. But I think some of you are already familiar with this. The Colliers had been crushed under a pile of newspapers. The newspapers had toppled onto the brothers. So the problem is somewhere here, right? That's the run-on. The Colliers had been crushed under a pile of newspapers that had toppled onto the brothers. So we just turned this into an adjective clause. Now, if you're not really sure how to do that, don't worry too much because we'll be talking about that in a couple weeks in grammar.